All right, I can see we have a few on, so we might get started. So hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining us today for our webinar on taking your applications global with Microsoft and HashiCorp, which will be presented by David Wright, Technical Channel and Alliances at HashiCorp, and Michael Frederick, Cloud Solution Architect, ISV at Microsoft. So today, Dave and Michael are going to run through some of the typical challenges you can face when building to deliver a global customer base and how to solve those problems using modern tools designed for the cloud. Before we get started, I just want to run over a few items. First of all, just letting you know that this session is being recorded, and we'll make the recording available on our website soon. I'll send you an email following this webinar with a link to that recording. So today's presentation and demo will last about 45 minutes, and we've dedicated 10 to 15 minutes at the end for a Q&A. So to keep to that 45-minute time frame, it's best that we ask questions and answer questions toward the end. So if you do have questions, please drop them in the Q&A tab there at the bottom of your screen, and we'll read them out and address them at the end. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Over to you, Michael.
Thank you, Pete. Today, we're here to talk about taking your app global. But first, there are two core scenarios I wanted to talk through to level set what it actually means to take your app global. The first one is fairly obvious, but you're a SaaS company who's been successful in your local market, say for instance, Australia, and to support the next phase of your company's growth, you've seen an opportunity in, say, North America that you want to pursue. The second scenario is kind of the inverse. You're a SaaS company who, say, is headquartered in Australia, whereas you've built your platform, and you have a great online presence and even better marketing. And you've started to acquire customers in other regions, say Europe. So in the first example, you're a SaaS company looking to go to another region. In the second scenario, you're a SaaS company in one geo and people from other geo are coming into your SaaS application. Cool. Now, unfortunately, there's going to be some challenges along the way, both technical and non-technical, but today we're here to focus mainly on the technical challenges. Now, depending on what industry you're in and your business model and the tenancy models you've chosen for your software, you might be tackling these challenges a little bit differently. For the first one, small number of staff. So in this first scenario in particular, you're looking to expand to another geography. Now, big questions you might have to ask and answer yourself are, how many staff should you deploy in a new region? 0, 3, 5, 10? Should you only deploy sales staff? Should you deploy technical staff and customer success staff? All these questions you have to ask yourself and potentially find and overcome these challenges. And for instance, there's more, like, do you form a partnership with a deployment partner where you provide the app and then they roll out the app to your customers in the other region? The second one is speed to market. So what does customer acquisition look like for you? Are you in scenario 2 where your customers are from all around the world and you want to have them running on your application? What does your trial and sign-up experience look like? Often the customer's first experience with your company is when they sign up for your application, so to make sure it's a great experience. Now, secondly, how do you deploy that new customer onto your platform? So happen in a timely manner. I've worked with customers on my end where it takes days for them to provision a new customer, and they've identified that as a major blocker for them having greater success in market. The third one here is deployment quality. Really, with either scenario, you need to make sure that you're deploying your customers right the first time. So how do you deploy new customers? Are you doing it manually? Do you have a professional services engagement you roll out when you deploy your application? Are you using a deployment partner? But the big question really is, how do you know your customers are being set up correctly the first time? And the last potential challenge here is data sovereignty. With kind of either scenario, depending what your platform does, what industry you're in, your business model, your customers may require the data to stay in a specific geopolitical boundary. So the big question there is, how are you achieving this technically? Cool. Now, what can we do about these challenges? The first one is slightly a bit out of the scope of this talk, but use public cloud. And I want to make sure this is covered because it can potentially help alleviate all the potential challenges I mentioned on the previous slide. So for instance, Azure, Microsoft's public cloud, has a whole bunch of regions all over the world with many more announced. So whether it's data sovereignty concerns, that your customers having data stay in a particular region, or using Azure's consistent deployment and management services to decrease deployment speed while keeping quality high, public cloud and Azure can help solve these potential challenges. Now, automate deployment of new customers. Like I was speaking about before, often your customer's first experience with your company might be getting a trial of your platform, or they've just purchased your platform and they're eagerly waiting to try it out. And we really want this experience to be great and fantastic. So what can we do about that? Automate the deployment of new customers onto your platform. No more manual deployments, no more ClickOps, no more pressing the wrong buttons. Invest early in automation. I'm going to be diving a little bit deeper into this in the next slide and doing a demo of how I can use HashiCorp's Terraform and Microsoft's Azure to solve this potential problem. And the last one, use a multi-region deployment strategy. So Dave's going to dive a little bit deeper into this, but depending again on your business strategy, deployment model, and what your app does, you might need to deploy your app across 2, 3, 4, or 5 regions. And this can address things like data sovereignty requirements or increase your customers' experience by having your app closer to where they're physically located. Cool. So I want to dive a little bit deeper into this topic because I'm very passionate about it. So what do we really want to automate the deployments? So the first one here is you want to do customer deployments without human intervention anytime, anywhere. So way back on the first slide, I talked about scenario 2, where your app's getting traction internationally. So how are you going to set up new customers or trials when it's 4 a.m. in your local time zone? One way to do this is to fully automate the deployment. So international customers can trial or buy your product anytime, anywhere. And I'll be showing one way to do this in the demo on the next slide. Cool. The next point is make sure all your deployments are the same. No more ClickUps. Unfortunately, as humans, we make mistakes. So if you run a process that's highly manual, it's going to fail from time to time. And that could potentially cause a bad experience for your customers and again, potentially lose sales. So again, we're talking through this in the demo on the next slide. Then a third point here is integrate the cloud marketplace. So you're currently selling or marketing through a cloud marketplace. Microsoft has a commercial marketplace that enables you to create, publish, and manage your solution. And your solutions are listed in our online stores alongside our own Microsoft solutions, connecting your businesses, organizations, and government agencies around the world. So if you're looking to create a Get It Now offer listing in the Microsoft commercial marketplace, then automating the deployment of new customers can help develop a potential new channel to market. Imagine your customer finds your app in the marketplace, clicks Get It Now. A few minutes later, they have access to your system or your app. These are the type of experiences we're looking to build. Now, keep your code consistent with minimal versions of your product. This might be fairly obvious, but if your business strategy is to deploy a new tenant for each customer, then you want to have as least possible versions of your code as possible. For instance, when a new customer signs up to your application, you want to deploy that customer the same as all your other customers with the same version of code. Now, how do you make sure it's up to date? How do you make sure it has the latest changes? We should be really trying to avoid custom code for each customer. Otherwise, when you start testing and then try to upgrade each customer across all of your platforms and applications, it's going to become very complex very fast. And again, during the demonstration, I'll kind of show how to deploy a new instance of my app for every new customer that it gets deployed with the same version of the code. Now, the last point here is you really want to start this journey at the start of your expansion journey and not at the end. And the reason for this is because if you can pour time into your automation early, you can keep your technology growing costs low while your app goes global. And hopefully, keeping costs low for you will allow you to keep costs low for your customers. Cool. Now, next slide is a demo. So I just want to talk through this demo at the moment. So basically, we're going to have a customer, and this could be an external customer, someone from a different geography, or it could even be some of your internal deployment staff. Maybe you're not ready to have this exposed externally, but it's still a great idea to automate. So what we're going to have here is going to have the internal staff go to a sign-up page and kick off a process to deploy a new customer. So I'm just going to stop sharing now. I'll just click out of that. Cool. And we're going to go to my sign-up page. Now, I'm going to do this first up front because it takes about 9.5 minutes to deploy my app. So let's pretend I have a fantastic task app. We'll have to imagine here because I'm not a very good front-end developer. And this is my public-facing website, and any customers from around the world can sign up to my app. So I'm going to click the sign-up button here. And I'm going to type in my customer name, which is Contoso. Now I'm going to select a tier. Now I'm currently not using this in my flow, but if you wanted to have a different tier that customers can choose, you could potentially have different versions of your app deployed through the same code. And lastly, I'm going to put an email address. Now I'm not really going to be using this in my demo, but again, if you wanted to complete the flow of, say, having your system email your customer to say, yes, your tenant's up and running, here's a link, that's absolutely something you can do. Cool, so I'm going to click sign up here. Now, again, the reason I did that is because it takes a few minutes to deploy. So if we go back to my demo slide here. So basically, we've done step 1, we've become a customer, and we've gone to our sign up page. what's now going to happen is that sign up page is then going to create a REST call to Azure DevOps, which is the kind of the platform I'm using to do some of the automation. Now that DevOps kind of organization is they're going to have a pipeline, and that pipeline deploys HashiCorp's Terraform code. Now I really like Terraform for doing these type of things because I can provision infrastructure or services in the cloud over and over and over repeatedly in a high quality, and I know it's going to be right every time. So in that step here, Terraform's going to save the state of that deployment to an Azure storage account, and then it's going to deploy a new version of my application to Azure's cloud, just in what we call a resource group. Now that application has kind of three components. It has a front end, an API, and a Cosmos DB Mongo API backend. Now I deliberately created a 3-tier application so we can make sure that we can deploy a fairly non-basic but not complex app and show how it works in the cloud. So next, I'm just going to jump out of this and go into Azure DevOps and show you what's happening. So we jump into Azure DevOps. So this is my Azure DevOps organization. And as you can see, I've got one pipeline here. So if we go into this pipeline, we can see that I triggered a pipeline 57 seconds ago. So that's when I went to that sign up page and clicked sign up. And inside of this pipeline, if we go and have a look, we can see it's currently running. So I'll look at that agent job here. Cool. So at the moment, this is a standard DevOps pipeline. It's got multiple steps inside of it. Now, all this is doing, again, is deploying some Terraform code. So as you can see, it's installing Terraform here. It's doing an init. It's doing a plan. And it's currently doing an apply here. So what that apply is doing, it's going to go through and provision all of those services I was talking about in the following picture inside of Azure. Now, while that's going, we'll let that run. I'll show you one that I've previously done already. So I'm going to go to my Azure portal. I'm going to go to my resource groups. Now, when I create the instances of this application, I just give it a random name. So as you can see at the bottom here, this resource group's got a pretty random name. So I'll click on that one here. And you can see as it's deploying into Azure, there's kind of 3 or 4 resources that it deploys. So it's going to have the front end, the API, and the MongoDB backend running Cosmos DB. So if we click on the front end here, I'll just jump on the URL, which is this one. And I'll jump on a new tab. I'll just move the sharing button here. Cool. And this is my app. And you can see here, this is a pretty standard app. It's just a task app. I can create tasks, like I can mow my lawns, which I need to do on the weekend, actually. I'll do the front yard. And you can see my bad typing skills. And we'll click create. And that's just creating a task. And as you can see, that page is going to refresh and you can see my task has been created inside of my app. Now I can click on that task and I can give it a due date. So we'll say on the weekend. I can click save and that's going to update in the back end and also in the database. And then just to make sure it's all working, we'll just go ahead and delete that. So that's basically my app. You have to use your imagination a little bit to make sure it's actually a cool app when it's probably not. But basically, I'm deploying that for each new customer that goes to my sign up page and click on sign up. Now let's just check out how that deployment is going. So the deployment's still got a few minutes to go. And we can see here, if we go back to the slide, this is what it's creating here, this RAND-IG resource group, but I've also got this kind of what we're calling auxiliary services. So what that is that sign up page you saw before, and it's an Azure storage account, which is used by Terraform to save the state of each deployment into Azure. Now, there are other ways to do this. There's native ways of doing this with Terraform. If you look at the Enterprise Edition, which I'm sure Dave and Pete can talk you through as well. Cool. So we're just waiting for that to provision. While that's going on, maybe I'll show you the Terraform code that's used to deploy this. So if we go here, and we go to my repo. Cool, and we go to deploy, Terraform, core, and we'll click on this. So basically this is the Terraform code I'm using to deploy all these services inside of Azure. As you can see, I'm creating a resource group. I'm creating my Cosmos DB backend with the Mongo API. I'm then creating a Mongo database, a Mongo collection, and then I have to create a resource plan inside of Azure, which is how I provision our web apps. So I'm creating that plan, then creating my API, a whole bunch of settings go into here. I create the front end and a whole bunch of settings that go into here. And that's how it deploys. And we'll just check on the deployment and see how that's going. Pipeline's still running. Cool, and that's got, like 5 minutes to go, but as you can see, when that's finished, it's going to deploy a new version of my app, and I'm going to pull through that company name as well. So on that front page, you saw me type in Contoso. That's going to be pulled all the way from that sign-up page into DevOps, into Terraform, and then into my final app. So you can create customized experiences for each of your customers through the same code base. And that's basically the whole demo. So thank you very much. And I'm going to pass over to Dave and stop sharing. Cool. So over to you, Dave.
Unmute always helps. I will, let's get up to the right slide. So Michael talked about a lot of obviously different elements, and he focused around that whole infrastructure as code component. Also within that structure, there is Terraform Cloud, which is our SaaS offering. So Michael mentioned Terraform Enterprise. The Terraform Cloud has a free sign-up tier. So if you wanted to actually build out an example like this and integrate in with an API-triggered call, then you could do that as well and integrate this through natively with Terraform Cloud, which means that the state component is managed by Terraform Cloud, and the updates and changes and ads moves are all managed as part of that flow, rather than you having to build a workflow around that. So it just simplifies that criteria. In that context, what I'm going to talk about though is focusing on the networking component. And so we know that we know that networking used to be relatively simple, and we know that networking was very much focused around your data center or your application build. So when we used to build apps, or when I used to build apps in the past, there was the criteria around setting up all of these parameters. You had to build your networking. You knew where your workflows were coming from. We knew that the internet was going to be that single point of control. Most of the security policies were tied around that single choke point, and a lot of the criteria within your organization, you could control your traffic flow into a DMZ that hosted your front end. The front end had a very defined communication path through to your middle tier and your database. That was controlled through either firewall points or even through routing elements. You had very tight control over all of these things. You know what the IP addressing was. I unfortunately still can remember a lot of the IP addressing of one of the big organizations I worked for. There were very defined routing rules. You could split traffic types off to go to certain parts, and you were very much the king of your domain. And you knew what all of those elements were, and you had focus around all of those things. And so, when we were talking about this context of how do you go global and how do you create repeatability, obviously, as you move and shift to take advantage of the public cloud, which gives you that flexibility of being able to go global, it gives you the flexibility of being able to put applications close to your user base. So in the scenarios that Michael was talking around, suddenly you find yourself in a US market and people are saying, this is a great app, but there's so much delay. We need to have a better front end, or it takes too long for this to update. And so you want to be able to adapt and deploy into those scenarios. But as soon as you do that, obviously now you've created a complex environment, and particularly from a connectivity perspective. And so as soon as you move to the public cloud, there are a lot of advantages by doing that, but you also bring in complexity particularly into the networking tier. So, as you move into this domain, you don't have control over what those IP addresses are. So you're going to have understand how to dynamically find those services and understand where services are being registered. As you move into taking advantage of containerization and VMs all over the place, and start to build out from a true API and microservices criteria. So as we move away from that traditional 3-app tier into breaking into microservices and multi-services, now you have a lot of traffic going east-west or going across within your organization. So you have, instead of the largest volume of data being from the internet in like it used to be, so now you have this scale, a large scale of information flowing between services to actually pull those in. And particularly if you are, as Michael was talking about, how do you take advantage of keeping one version? How do you update that? How do you make adds, moves, and changes? How do you then steer the right traffic around that? How do you take advantage of being able to deploy data in one place, like your back end as a central repository, and connect all of those other services to that, so that you have single access to a particular resource groups? And how can you do that on a dynamic basis? So, we talked about that sign-up process. You have a very clearly automated process. Michael mentioned it. There were, you have users. User base happens to be out of the EU, and they all do, signing up at 4 a.m. when you don't really want to be getting out of bed. How do you tie all of these things together? And so those challenges then combined with some of the more nuanced challenges around, that being an ISV and delivering it, of how do I control my flows? How does that scale for multi-tenancy? Do we need to actually use a multi-cloud strategy? There could be, or a hybrid strategy. Your application may need some component of an on-premise element, and that may mean that you need to be able to tie your cloud deployment into an on-premise component. How do you tie those two things together? How do you then operate across multiple types of environments? So I have this new realm of containerization and virtualization and serverless that we're building to lower our costs and reduce our runtime environments. But my core application is still being built, and I have customer scenarios that I need to connect to traditional hypervisor type application bases. And then also connecting all of those things across an encrypted element. How do I create an encrypted base across that? And so all of these challenges go together, and that's just the deployment challenges, right? When you get into then the day two challenges around, well, I've built all this thing and I've figured out how to connect it all, and then now I need to do an add, move, or change. I need to do a application update. I'm bringing in these new services. I want to make these changes. I want to add these new features. How do I deal with all of that complexity, and how do I deal with being able to survive in that automated world? And so this is where HashiCorp's console product and our service mesh really comes into play. And the thinking behind that is to create this single control plane for the cloud networks, but also across all of networking. So deploying and connecting anything to anywhere at any time, and really tying the different elements together. So how do I interoperate with my existing network appliances or infrastructure elements or traditional hypervisor-based elements? How do I control and connect between different platforms? And then also the important part is, how do I then get telemetry and login and application performance data into my monitoring and secure those elements? And this is where Console has been focused around being able to tie those elements together to really look at how you can simplify that operational and automate that operational process. And so, we talked about being able to deploy across anything, and that means that we have worked with a large number of ecosystem partners to make sure that we have consistency across the platform. So we can work with lots of different elements. We know how to natively work with them. We know how to natively push changes to some of those things. And a little bit later on, when we're talking about some of the features, we'll kind of dive into an example of that. But it's making sure that regardless of what you're using, we can connect it, and we can make sure that we understand how to work with it. That's fundamentally the any part of that connect anything to anywhere. And so by focusing on those, having that broad control plane, what we've seen is that Console can really help solve three really kind of key use cases that are applicable to what we've been talking about here. So the first is, in my environment and my dynamic environment, I need to now discover these automatic services. How do I discover them? How do I make sure that my region in the US is actually healthy, or that service in the US is healthy? And if it isn't, how do I make sure that from a customer experience, I can relocate that to somewhere else and they transition and carry on operating without any knowledge or interruption to their service delivery? How do I tie that networking infrastructure component and automation deployment in with my automatic stand up? So I can automatically stand up my environment and I can build it. How do I make sure I can add that into and connect with all of the other different parts of my platform, make sure that all those elements can communicate? I have a centralized database, for example, that I'm using to keep track of some things, and I need those new tenancies to come up and connect. And so how do I do that automatically? And so we talk about those, some of those concepts as well a little bit later. And then finally, the kind of utopia around having a full service mesh. And this is where you have end-to-end encryption and end-to-end connectivity, regardless of what the platform is or where it is. And services can all be connected through this service mesh. And so all of these things go together to help you deliver this multi-cloud, multi-platform scenario. So as you expand, or build out your customer bases, so you can actually then connect them together without any fear of having to think around, well, we don't know how I can deliver to that element or to deliver to that region. It's just a case of taking advantage of what the public cloud has, building in that environment, and being able to connect that automatically back into your current infrastructure, or starting to be able to make sure that you have insight and connectivity into that area. But over and above what is already there. So obviously there could be direct connect elements that would need to be established, but this is making sure that you can automate the application part over the top of that. And so in that vein, we're going to take a closer look at some of those key services, what they mean, how they connect together, and how they can help you in these build and deliver in the future. And so the most important part of this overall concept is the central service registry, or service registry. And fundamentally what this is a DNS mechanism that Console uses to be able to register what services are. So in this case, we have a whole list of services that have been discovered and registered. Where this is different from normal DNS is obviously it also has an associated health check with it. And so here you can see that the web in one of those regions has failed. And because of that, we will actually not service that request and we'll automatically take it out. The other advantage is that because this is using service requests, service records, should I say, and building a definition around what the service is in terms of port number, where it's located, you can also put DC-centric components into this. So this could be that this DC is, you've built in your multi-region, and taking Michael's scenario to the next level, you're pushing into a new into the central US as a new market because of the success that you've grown from your EU one, and all of this is being run out and built from a small staff here in Australia without any local customer base. Now with the service registry, you can actually put a context which says, well, there's an EU data center, this is the US data center, and you can still connect them together, and services within that can be geolocation based and push those responses back out to that particular data center. So you have context, you can steer services, you have awareness around what the health of those services are. And so now you have the ability to create control over what those services are. What also the service registry will let you do is understand how to discover and automate using Console Agent or other mechanisms that Console can support, register those services automatically. So as services spin up, so whether you're building those through microservices or an automated process, they can be automatically integrated and discovered. And this means that that east-west traffic that used to be a lot of it tucked behind load balancers can now be done automatically, reducing the complexity, removing that infrastructure component from the configuration, and allowing services to actually be able to communicate and register themselves. So once these services can be clearly defined and registered, you can now actually then allow those services to connect together. Now, whether this is connection via Console Connect, so our service mesh component, or whether this is actually talking locally within that environment that allows them to actually communicate directly, is completely up to you and how you've configured your console services. But within that construct, you can now see that you have a set of services that can be discovered automatically. You then have an application that can go and query the service registry. It can get a localized response, whether that's I need to talk to within my local context, deliver to my local user base, or oh, it's broken, I need to actually deliver this now from another region to make sure that the user has the best experience and no outage. You can start to really put context and delivery around that. Obviously, we talked about how you can deliver and change applications, whether these are into network appliances or into even configuration changes within an application. And how we do this is using this concept of the console templates. The console templates are basically there to be able to push or read from the service registry, push that to a pre-configured template, create a new rendered template, so have all that information, and push it down to the application. So this means that now I can actually automatically discover something, I can create a new configuration and push that to an application. And what this means is that in that workflow, when we take that console template, we get the information that we want, it means that we can now customize that in a way that we see fit. Now, whether this is for updating, for example, a load balancer. So in this example, and I said we'd mentioned the HA proxy, we can see that we have used a console template to update the back end. So we've added, or we automatically discover a new web server that comes up. We add that into the load balancing pool. We define what that service ID pool is. And now as that adds into that, we can update that configuration task. And now we can serve that new node address from the HA proxy, from the load balancer. So whether it's integrating into that load balancing component, or whether this is adding that as another service or another regional component, it means you have a dynamic mechanism to be able to actually deliver and integrate into your applications. And this gives you that flexibility around how do you scale, how do you drive, how do you shift things around automatically, particularly as you start to move to more microservices, as you start to be able to pick your application apart, create flexibility, and scenarios where you can then integrate this with, say, HashiCorp's Vault, which acts as a transit encryption engine. And now you can actually have a single database in a particular area, and you can use that to encrypt the records as they come into that database, so that only that local region can read them. And so now you're simplifying your design, you're still meeting all of your regulatory control, and you're actually you're actually just using an automatic connection process to be able to make sure that everything can connect to that. And so, just to kind of sum up, what we're saying is with the tool sets that HashiCorp provides, whether that's Terraform for the automation and deployment, whether it's Vault for integration with your API and security, and providing secrets, providing a dynamic secret to log into that Cosmos DB, or providing being able to inject a secret into that pipeline to be able to automatically control that, or whether it's the focus of what we've been talking about here, which is connectivity and how do we solve those connectivity challenges. Console also really kind of steps up to give you that flexibility and agility in the modern networking world, but allow you to connect it through to your existing infrastructure, being able to tie this easily into on-premise components, and being able to even operate with elements that are outside of the traditional microservices domain, and connect to things that couldn't run an agent, such as the managed database service, for example, and pull all of those services in, being able to connect them, and therefore reduce your risk. And as Michael pointed out, the whole concept around this, and particularly when going global, is about creating automation, creating repeatability, and making sure that you take the human out of the deployment and standing up process to reduce the overall risk. Because the further the human can be away from the process, the less risk or chance it is of the human stuffing up. With that, I'd just like to say thank you. Thank you for everybody for coming and attending. Thank you for listening. And over to you, Pete.
Thanks, Dave. And yeah, thanks, guys. Great presentation and demo. Very nice work. Very clear. And it looks like we're right on time. We've got plenty of time left. So I'm just looking to see if we've got any questions in the Q&A tab. I can't see any at the moment, but if you do have any questions, drop them in the Q&A or click raise hand if you want to speak in person, and I can unmute you. And if you do think of any other questions after this session, you can reach out to Dave and Michael directly on those email addresses that you can see on your screen there. But like I said at the top of the call, this session was recorded, so I'll be sending out a link to this recording soon, and you can look back and grab those email addresses then and ask them when a question does pop up. Well, folks, that brings us to the end of our session today. We hope you found it useful. As I mentioned earlier, this was recorded. You'll be getting the link plus a link to other supporting material after this. And if you like what you heard and want to learn more about how HashiCorp and Microsoft work together, I encourage you to visit our Learn site, which you can visit at learn.hashicorp.com. There's lots of great stuff there where you can dive a little bit deeper on today's topic. But like I said, any questions, reach out to Dave and Michael after this session. So thanks again for joining us. Big thank you to our presenters, David Wright and Michael Friedrich from Microsoft. Thank you very much, guys. Well done. And everyone else, thanks again. Enjoy the rest of your day, and bye for now.